Hello. Glad to be here. Glad you all are joining me. Sitting here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, once again behind the bookshelf. I like doing them in front of the bookshelf. Once had someone leave me a comment that said, "You know he's smart because he's sitting in front of books." Now, when you hear that comment, you would think it was sarcastic. However, this is YouTube, right? So you never know. It could actually be someone who thinks you're more intelligent if you have books behind you. Shout out. The first comment I see is from Comsamal from France. Hello. Tim. Hello. Felicity. Hello. Great live. Good to see you all. I'm glad you're all here. The beverage that will not be named is back. It's just now evening time, 8 o'clock local time, so I can open that beverage and pour it into a glass full of ice. Sebastian, shout out to you. Shout out to someone who mentions popcorn. Glad you're all here. We're all having a great time. If you haven't done it so far, shout out to Dan Uko. If you haven't done it so far, please make this a bigger conversation. Please tweet this out. Please put it. Someone from Salem, Oregon, Alex, is shouting out to me. Well, shout out to you. And if you haven't done it already, please post this as a Facebook status. I'm listening to Caleb. I'm engaging with Caleb. Oh my God, what did you hear Caleb just say? You gotta join this. You gotta join this. Thanks, Yan Man, for the 99-cent super chat. Always appreciating the donations, right? Gotta pay the bills. But it's good. Tim says he needs some popcorn. But hey, folks, seriously, let's make this a bigger conversation. Dan Uko says, one for me and the professor. Hey, that's great. Alfred Kaholic says shout out to Caleb. Well, great, Alfred. Glad you're with us. We're having a great time here. I continue pouring the beverage that will not be named. We have a lot on the agenda to talk about tonight, or do we, right? I think tonight is going to be more of a night for you all to set the agenda. So if you don't already have something you want me to speak about, please be thinking of one, because I've got plenty of time here tonight, and we have got plenty to talk about. And this is really about you, ultimately, right? I do this all for you, right? I don't just do this. If I wanted to just watch myself talk, I could do it without YouTube. I could just do a video in my own private home of myself talking. But this is really about us. This is a conversation that we are having. I'm excited about it. So much that we can discuss. So if you haven't already done it, now is the time. Put this on Twitter. Tweet out Caleb Maupin. Oh, Kinky's with us. Glad as always. Sebastian wants me to talk about the Naxals. Jorge Olamos wants me to talk about the UN report on Venezuela. What else do people have in mind? Caleb, are your books available overseas, says Tim. Yes, they are. You can order it on Amazon. It's available anywhere you got Amazon. It's also on Lulu. It's everywhere. You can get this book. Someone's asking me about the Venus Project. The Venus Project. Wow, that's a blast from the past, but I can certainly talk about it. Lincolnite Yankee says, got Getting Rich Without Capitalism a few days ago. Great. Well, hey, if you want to do a review of it, there you go. Other people are asking me all kinds of questions, and I've got all kinds of answers. What an evening this is going to be. What are the odds of we getting to see Richard Wolff mop the floor with Peterson? Well, that would be fun, right? Now, we saw Jordan Peterson debate. We saw him debate with, what's his name? The Slavoj Žižek. And it wasn't so much of a debate as it was like a car race, except the two people have different race routes, and one guy was going vroom, and the other guy went vroom, and they were just Slavoj Žižek. They just, it was like, it wasn't really a debate. It was two people driving cars in rapidly different directions. If I recall correctly, Jordan Peterson in that debate was psychoanalyzing how mentally ill the author of the Communist Manifesto must be, and Slavoj Žižek was giving his general critique of Western civilization at this time from a psychoanalytic and Marxist perspective. And it was, they couldn't really have a debate because it was almost as if they were speaking different languages to each other. They were talking about completely different things. Toddy Fan wants me to talk about modern monetary theory. Astushi says sorry. Caleb McCoy says, is the book available as an ebook? No, it is not. It is, you have to get a print edition. It's right here. Fun stuff. Yes, we have a number of topics to talk about, so if you haven't done it already, hit that subscribe button. If you haven't done it already, hit that bell to make sure you get notifications for when I do these. Remember, this is all about you. This is all about us and the community that we are building. Jorge Alamos says, it is hilarious that Peter conceded almost nothing to Zizek, even on the question on atheism. Indeed, interesting times. Evening Caleb, says Christopher Simonchik. Evening to you, Christopher. Wow, we are going to have a great time. It is Saturday evening. It is 4th of July weekend. We had a special 4th of July broadcast on the evening of the 4th of July. Great fun. We talked about all kinds of things. We talked about flag burning. We talked about all kinds of stuff. But now we're back to our general, normal kind of thing. We're talking here. Rick Fry is talking about communism. And, whoa, boy, we got plenty to talk about here. So, are we ready to get down to business? Or are there more things that people want to say? I can wait, right? I'm not in a rush. I can drink some of this beverage that will not be named. Dante Solano just got a book on Fidel and religion. Excited to read it. I have read that and I enjoyed it. Yes. We're having a great time here. We are really having a great time here today. So much to talk about. Bring it, says Daniel Madruga. Charlie Wilkins says, interest in Orthodox Christianity being ironically compatible with socialism. Very interesting. I don't know enough about Orthodox Christianity to comment on it, but that is an interesting remark. And I will say that when I was in Russia, many people that I met were both Orthodox Christian and also had a very, very strong respect and admiration for what went on in the Soviet period. Lincolnite Yankee says he just got a history of the three internationals. Felicity wants me to talk about One Belt, One Road initiative, and I will be talking about that, and that will be fitting in nicely with another topic that I plan to go over tonight. So yes, we're all gathering here on this discussion. Tootie fan, Caleb McCoy wants me to talk about the Communist Party USA. Komsomol wants me to talk about the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and that fits in nicely with One Belt, One Road initiative. Dante Solano wants me to talk about the Greek elections. Alex Giovanni says fascism seems like, and I missed it then, it went right by. Yes, the Moscow Patriarch does want socialism, someone says. I'm interesting. Yes, so much that we can talk about, so... Now that we have been doing this for a whole 7 minutes, American monopoly crisis hits the military. Interesting article, says Rumba Martin 8. We've been doing this for well over 7 minutes, folks. Swine Class is with us, quoting the Orthodox Church Father. When God seems deaf and cries, consider that you've heard nothing of the cries of the poor and done nothing. JT24 is with us, says hello. Wow, this is great. People are just pouring in here. We're having a great time. Have you talked about the deal of the century, says Kinky. I have not talked about the deal of the century. Wow, so much to get to today. So, first things first. Tehran presses for the return of oil tanker. The British, through their overseas territory of Gibraltar, have seized an Iranian oil tanker. This Iranian oil tanker was destined for Syria. They claim that because Iran was allegedly sending this oil tanker to Syria, that Iran was violating the sanctions imposed on Syria by the European Union. So they have seized this oil tanker in order to prevent it from going to Syria, according to British officials. And it's widely being whispered that the United States pressed the British to seize this Iranian oil tanker. And the Wall Street Journal article interestingly, quotes Iranian officials describing the interaction, saying that this is tantamount to maritime piracy, and going on to say that the Islamic Revolution has never initiated any battles in its 40-year history, but it has also never hesitated in responding to bullies. Folks, it's pretty clear that there is a section of the American government, of the British government, that is, at this point, determined that something happened with Iran. And it's kind of strange and sad to watch their desperation. They tried to tell us first that Iran attacked two of its best friends' oil tankers. That did not happen, most likely. Why would Iran attack Japan while the Japanese prime minister was in Tehran negotiating them? Why would Iran attack John Fredrickson, an oil billionaire from Norway who's been their friend for decades? Why, at a time when the United States has announced its goal is to bring Iranian oil sales down to zero, would Iran go and attack two of its oldest business partners and friends? Doesn't make any sense. Then they tried to tell us that Iran shot down a U.S. drone in international waters for no reason. That out of the blue, they just, I don't know, they were bored that day, whatever reason, and they decided to shoot down a drone in international waters. Well, Iran says, no, we shot down this drone after it penetrated our waters and our airspace, and we can prove that. And Russia has come forward and said we can back up Iran's claims. So now, at this point, we have the British in their overseas territory of Gibraltar near Spain seizing another country's ship. You know, that is an act of warfare, generally. If you attack another country's vessel, that's generally an act of warfare. And the British are holding this ship, saying that it violates European Union sanctions imposed on Syria. And at this point, I mean, is there any shred of, I mean, okay, so say Iran, say that, you know what, say that there was an American oil tanker, was just traveling through the Gulf or whatever, and Iran seized it, and they said, it violated Iran's sanctions on some, you can't do that. But it's Iran, right? They're the bad guys, so anything you do to them are supposed to be, I mean, it just shows how biased the narrative really is. And it's very scary. And I feel like, and I think a lot of people watching this are watching each of these situations, and it's almost like every situation is a tinderbox. Every situation is, you know, a ticking time bomb. And whoever the forces are that are determined to have this war with Iran, or determined to escalate tensions between the USA and Iran, it's like they're determined that they're going to do this, they're going to seize an oil tanker, they're going to shoot down they're going to do something. And Iran is going to shoot, and America's going to shoot, and it's going to be kaboom, 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 and the world, that region's going to light up. And it's very, very bizarre. Why would anyone want that to happen, you know? Trump was apparently very close to striking Iran earlier and didn't do it. And this is a very, very scary situation. It's very, very scary. And you have to ask yourself, why would anyone be trying to create more tension in the Middle East region? Why would anyone want, I mean, we've already got people dying in Yemen in big numbers as the Saudis bombard Yemen in the hopes of restoring Mansour Hadi, their puppet dictator, the only man on the ballot in the election following the Arab Spring, as the Revolutionary Committee, the Houthi and Ansarullah group, the Southern Movement, the followers of ex-President Saleh, all of them fight against Saudi Arabia. So we have a war in Saudi Arabia going on. We have a war in Syria going on as the Saudi and U.S.-backed forces try to topple the Syrian elected government, Bashar Assad, the Ba'athist Arab Socialist government. We've got people in Bahrain, the majority, which are Shia Muslim, and even, some Sunnis who just want democracy, fighting against a brutal, absolute monarchy imposed on them by Saudi Arabia. We've got the whole situation with the Palestinians. So why in the world would anyone want to just light that region up with an all-out war between forces aligned with Iran and forces aligned with Saudi Arabia? That is not something that anyone would desire, I would think. But apparently somebody does want it. And there seems to be a faction that is just determined that things with Iran light up. And that's something we should all be very, very, very worried about. But we need to recognize, when you look at this, how much of this is really about oil. it becomes very, very apparent that oil is a big factor in all of this. Iran is accused of blowing up 2 oil tankers, lighting them on fire. Now the British have seized an oil tanker. Oil seems to be a big factor in this, right? And someone says it's not about oil. Oh, I really beg to differ. I really, really beg to differ. That part of the world has been cursed by its oil. Really, it has been cursed by its oil resources. After the Second World War, it became apparent in that region that they were sitting on tons and tons and tons of black gold. And if you go to that region, you will realize that the lack of economic development there is largely due to the fact that they have economies that are completely centered around selling this most valuable commodity on the global economy. And that's a problem they have in Venezuela, too. Venezuela is also cursed by having huge amounts of oil, right? And that if you have huge amounts of oil, that can take the substitute for building a big economy. You can have a one commodity economy, and it's kind of a curse. And in particular, we know that the House of Saud, it had a relationship with the British, and then the British saw them as very useful in allowing the extraction of oil. And it was, the British oil companies, BP in particular, but also the Rockefellers, right? The Rockefellers were in there in 1938. They were in there. John D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil. That region has been kept chronically poor as just kind of the oil deposits. And you'll notice the governments that tend to be attacked in that region, the Syrian Ba'athist Arab Socialist government, the Iraqi Ba'athist Arab Socialist government, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Libyan Islamic Socialist Jamhuriyat, I don't know how to say it, but the Islamic Socialist government of Libya, they were engaged in trying to get out of that trap. They were selling lots of oil because that's what they had. But you'll notice, for example, that Gaddafi in Libya, he built the Great Man-Made River, which is at this point the world's largest irrigation system. And he did it in the hopes of getting Libya to the point that it would be not only food self-sufficient, but it would have a vibrant agricultural sector in addition to its oil. That's why Libya, under Gaddafi, spent huge amounts of its money to build this huge irrigation system in the hopes that the dry, desertous parts of the region would be able to blossom. That was one of their projects. It was actually similar to the Aswan Dam that the Soviet Union and Egypt, the Arab socialist leader Abdel Nasser built in Egypt, right? Most of Egypt has electricity now. I think almost all the country has it because the Soviet Union and the Arab socialist government of Abdel Nasser, they teamed up in the 1950s, late 50s, early 60s, and they built this facility called the Aswan Dam, and it's a huge hydroelectric power plant. And until then, there are so many villages throughout Egypt. Most villages in Egypt didn't have electricity. They did have it because of what was built there, right? And similar efforts were made in Syria. Syria and the Soviet Union, hydroelectric power plants. They wiped out illiteracy between 1981 and 1991. They wiped out illiteracy in Syria. And I've been to Iran, and I got to tell you, the level of economic development there is massive. I mean, Iran has its own car companies. Iran has got its own huge steel manufacturing apparatus. You go to Iran, they have a vibrant economy. And that the countries that haven't broken out of Western capitalism, like Saudi Arabia, like Jordan, like Qatar, like Oman, like Bahrain, they tend to have economies that are centered around two things: oil and weapons, right? The USA buys their oil, they use the money from the USA buying their oil to buy huge amounts of weapons, and that's their economy. That tends to be the issue, right? I mean, Saudi Arabia, a lot of the population lives in tents in Saudi Arabia. I bet you didn't know that. They do have some highways there. And in the 60s and 70s, you had the OPEC boycott, and you had efforts in that part of the world to try and have some level of economic development. You had the Baathists and that whole current, and that kind of put pressure on the Saudis and others, and you had kind of a nationalist push, and that's when the oil prices very significantly increased. But at this point, that seems to be what's going on. And the saddest thing to me, I did an interview, and this shows you how ridiculous YouTube and all of that can be. So, I think it was at least 3-4 years ago, I did an interview about the fact that there's a fictional, in the Aladdin movie, in the kids' Disney cartoon Aladdin, the name of the town that all the people live in is called Agrabah. And this Agrabah is not a real place. It's a fictional Middle Eastern city in the Aladdin Disney movie. So I did an interview about it. I did an interview about the fact that they took a poll among Trump supporters in the United States. Should we bomb Agrabah, the town in the Aladdin movie? And a very significant number of them said, yes, we should bomb Agrabah, even though Agrabah is not a real place. And this was years ago. I did an interview about it. It was just kind of a thing I did. So, randomly, couple weeks back, all of a sudden I was looking over my YouTube numbers, and this one particular interview I did was just, getting thousands of views all of a sudden. I thought, what in the world is going on here? Why are people looking at this old interview I gave about Agrabah on YouTube? What is going on here? Do you know what it was? The new Aladdin movie came out, and I guess the YouTube algorithms liked it. That's how ridiculous YouTube can be. The point aside, right? The point that I made in that interview 3-4 years back was that, the people in the United States that are what you could call Islamophobic, I'm not sure that's the best term, but whatever. The people in the United States that, and you've met them, I'm sure you've met them, right? There's one, if you're in the United States, especially if you're in New York City, you've met them, right? And they talk to you and they're like, I actually read the Quran. Yeah, I actually read the Quran. And on page 34, it says to kill all Christians and kill all women. And yeah, I read it. I read it. They think they're experts on Islam, and they sit there, and it's like their entire worldview consists of, oh my God, Muslims are going to kill us all. We got to kill all of them first. Oh my God, I'm worked up. And they're like this weird kind of bigoted paranoid where it's like, they see all Islam as like one entity that wants to kill them, and they're terrified of it, and they're hateful of it, and that's their entire worldview. And if you ask them about stuff in Asia, they somehow, it's like, well, China does business with Saudi Arabia, so therefore China is trying to spread Islam, and they don't know anything, right? And it's this weird worldview where it's like, and they sit there, and you would think they would be experts on Islam, because they fixate on it, but they're not really. They don't know the difference between a Sunni and a Shia. They don't know what an Alawite is. They don't know any of that stuff, right? They just know, like, Muslims are scary, and they're bad, and I know it, because I actually read the Quran, okay? And they'll tell you they've read the Quran about 100 times. They haven't. They've read, like, selections or something, but it is what it is. And you talk to those people, right? What is it that they don't like about Islam? Well, they say, in Islamic countries, women are not allowed to drive cars. Yeah, was true in Saudi Arabia until like a year ago. They'll say, in Islamic country, they list all these things, beheadings, and all that stuff that the Islamophobic people don't like is very true about Saudi Arabia. And it doesn't occur to these people that Saudi Arabia is like the most heavily tied to the West, right? All that stuff that they don't like, very true about a lot of these oil plantations that are tied in deeply with the U.S. military-industrial complex and with the U.S. super major oil companies. But the countries that the U.S. attacks and invades tend to be the ones that are the least in line with that stereotype. Libya, under Gaddafi, was leading in terms of women's role in the government. It was a secular country. They had industrialized the place. It was Saddam Hussein's Iraq, another secular government. You had Sunnis and Shias in government together. You had women in government. Here's something to think about. The country that is the big ally of the United States in the Arab Muslim world is called the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Right? They say in these other countries that the elections are rigged. They don't have elections in Saudi Arabia. It's an absolute monarchy. It has a political model from the 1400s. However, the countries that we don't like in the Middle East, what are they? They are the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Syrian Arab Republic, right? Now they say, oh, well, those elections in Syria aren't real. Well, they don't have unreal elections in Saudi Arabia because it's a kingdom, right? It's like You want to break this down for people. They're like, well, the Syrian elections are not real. Even if you maintain that, in Saudi Arabia, they don't have a rigged election. They don't have elections, right? I mean, they say, well, the Iranian Republic, well, the Guardian Council, and in Saudi Arabia, they don't have political parties. They don't have, these people don't get it. The countries that tend to be attacked are the countries that are modernizing, trying to get out of the oil trap, trying to industrialize, trying to move ahead with reform and human rights, and those are the countries that the United States tends to attack and put sanctions on and all that, and the countries that are the most in line with that Islamophobic stereotype. The countries that fit the nightmare, right? I mean, these people that sit around fixating on the Quran. I read the Quran, okay. Those people. The countries that are the most in line with that stereotype. Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar. Those are the countries that the United States does business with the most. Those are the most pro-Western. Those are the countries we're heavily invested in. Okay, so if the problem is just the people there, right? And if the West is supposed to be making them better, why is it that we're attacking the countries that are modernizing and aligning with the most right-wing, the most, primitive and barbaric systems there? This is something that people don't seem to get, right? If the problem was just the people of that region, if they were just like that, if they just had this religion that made them this way, why is it the countries that are the most tied into Western capitalism that most fit the stereotype these people like? And why is it then, on top of that, that the countries that we attack are the ones that are doing the most to modernize and break out of it? The time the USA invaded Iraq, anyone who knew anything about the politics of that region would know that attacking Iraq because of 9/11 made absolutely no sense. Osama bin Laden was a Saudi. He was a citizen of Saudi Arabia. In fact, his parents, his family, the bin Laden family, have almost a state monopoly on construction in Saudi Arabia. Al-Qaeda, which, that just means the base, but the organization that we refer to as Al-Qaeda is a Wahhabi organization. And it follows the Wahhabi Sunni interpretation of Islam that says you have to have an absolute monarchy, that says you basically have to maintain the political model that went out of fashion in the year 1400. They are the most conservative, fundamentalist, Sunni, Saudi Muslims. Saddam Hussein was a Ba'athist Arab socialist, right? Ba'athism is a political movement in the Middle East. Started out in Syria, and it was people that were in the Syrian Communist Party. And when the Popular Front began, and when the orientation of Syrian communists became that they shouldn't fight the French colonizers because of the Second World War, they formed their own party called the Ba'athist Party that would continue to fight the French colonizers, and they adopted Marxism and adopted Marxist principles in a way that they thought was consistent with the Arab civilization. They broke with the Communist International and established an Arab socialist party. So Saddam Hussein is a Ba'athist Arab socialist. And, Osama bin Laden is a Wahhabi fundamentalist, right? Osama bin Laden believes women shouldn't be able to drive cars. Saddam Hussein believes that that women should be on the battle line. There's posters, of Saddam Hussein honoring Layla Khalid and Palestinian women with guns, and it's completely ridiculous. Now, someone's talking about the Muslim Brotherhood. That's another current. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood was a current that started out in Egypt. It was kind of a sect that began in Egypt, and it was formed by small business owners who did not like the rise of Arab nationalism and Marxism in Egypt. And particularly after the Second World War, when the Arab socialist Abdel Nasser took power in Egypt, and Egypt started moving towards socialism and cooperating with the Soviet Union. When Arab socialism was on the march, the United States and the CIA began funding the Muslim Brotherhood because they wanted to stop Arab socialism. And the Muslim Brotherhood, their view, they oppose nationalism because they say it's all about religions. They were opposed to Arab nationalism, and they hated communism. They said communism is, secular. It doesn't believe in a religious government. the Muslim Brotherhood, their view is basically they believe in capitalism, and they believe in free markets, and they believe that everyone should be dedicated and religious, and they do like charity work to kind of indoctrinate low-income folks to be like their fighting force. That's the Muslim Brotherhood. It is small business owners, and that's the Muslim Brotherhood. And Turkey, the government of Turkey, Erdogan, that's Muslim Brotherhood politics there. Qatar, at this point, is a big supporter, I believe, of the Muslim Brotherhood. That's widely understood. That's the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, that's a current that is very anti-communist, and fought in, all over the Middle East. The Muslim Brotherhood has fought on behalf of the United States. In Syria, there was uprisings led by the Muslim Brotherhood in the 80s against the Ba'athist Arab Socialist government. Saddam Hussein didn't particularly, he had many fights with the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood was the main force of armed terrorist resistance to Abdel Nasser and the Arab Socialist government of Egypt. So the Muslim Brotherhood, that was a current that developed during that point. And again, you talk to those people that are like, oh my God, I've read the Quran. Like, they would say something stupid, like, oh my God, Obama went to Saudi Arabia, and so, and he shook hands with the Saudi king, and that proves that he's in the Muslim Brotherhood. And it's like, the Saudi monarchy, that's Wahhabis. The Muslim Brotherhood is illegal in Saudi Arabia, and what's the major difference between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Saudi monarchy is that the Muslim Brotherhood believes in free elections. They tend to believe in a semi-democratic republic. They just believe you have to be super religious, and they really hate communism. Whereas the Saudis believe in an absolute monarchy. It is illegal. In Saudi Arabia, if you were to walk around saying, hey, I'm in the Muslim Brotherhood, you'd be arrested. Qatar, they like the Muslim Brotherhood. Turkey, they like the Muslim Brotherhood. Saudi Arabia, no, they don't. Both the Saudi Wahhabis and the Muslim Brotherhood, those have been the main two factions that have been aligned with the United States in the Middle East. And right now in Syria, you have Muslim Brotherhood groups that are fighting to overthrow the Ba'athist Arab Socialist government in Syria, and you have Wahhabi groups that are fighting to overthrow them, right? And that seems to be what's taking place. But again, it seems to be the people that get attacked by the United States are not the Saudis that want this absolute monarchy, that still behead people in public, that don't have free elections at all, that just allowed women to drive cars and are now locking up and have imprisoned the women who are protesting for women to have the right to drive cars, right? That's not who the United States is bringing freedom and democracy to. The United States is not going after the Muslim Brotherhood that has engaged in violence and terrorism in the hopes of pushing back secular forces in that region, right? Assassinations, bombings, all kinds of horrendous things, in the hopes of promoting a conservative interpretation of Islam. No. The people that the United States is targeting are the secular leaders of Iraq, the secular leaders of Syria, the secular leaders of Libya, right? The Islamic Republic of Iran. I went to church. I've been to Iran, and I went to church on Sunday morning in Tehran. You couldn't do that in Saudi Arabia, right? In Iran, there are women who are brigadier generals in the army. In Iran, they have different political parties, and they have elections. Compared to Saudi Arabia, Iran is 1,000 times more democratic, 1,000 times more free and open. Now, Iran has very big issues with human rights, and they are the first to tell you that. They want reform, they want modernization. But compared to Saudi Arabia, Iran is it's 1,000 times better in terms of human rights. There's just no comparison, right? It's the Islamic Republic of Iran with a constitution, It's the Saudi monarchy, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It's like, Iran doesn't cut people's heads off in public or private, right? They don't have, public beheadings in Iran, right? It's pretty ridiculous. What I always tell people, when I was in Iran, I learned that what most Americans think about Iran is actually true about Saudi Arabia. And that needs to be acknowledged. And again, these people that are wildly Islamophobic, that it's like, oh my God, Muslims are coming, they don't seem to know any of this stuff, and it doesn't fit their narrative. I saw there was a video of these Proud Boys in D.C. They were chanting, West is the best, West is the best. And it's like, I know they're getting at this kind of like, oh, we need to, keep these foreign ideas, but it's like there would be no Saudi Arabia if it weren't for the West, right? Saudi Arabia, that political system is not the natural outgrowth of the people of that region, right? I mean, the reason that the House of Saud rules over that peninsula, over that territory, is because of something called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, right? The British Empire very much selected the House of Saud to be their middleman, when the Arab people have risen up and broken out of Western colonialism, the result has been Ba'athist Arab socialism, the Libyan Islamic Socialist government. That's been the result of Arab people breaking out of Western capitalism. So if Western capitalism is the solution, this whole narrative just doesn't add up. But that brings me back. Wow, we've spent a lot of time talking about that. That brings me back to a point that must be made, which is that I've talked before about this concept of Atlanticism. Atlanticism. Right? And that throughout history, you've seen the rise of different civilizations, but there's a particular phenomena that develops, and that is civilizations, or empires, I guess, that are based on the control of trade routes. Right? When you have a civilization that is based on the control of trade routes, it's not based on building up and developing, right? It's not based on expanding production, basically advancing human progress. It's based on control of the trade routes. And it's happened before. And you can call that phenomenon Atlanticism. That's really what it is. It's empires that are about controlling the trade routes. And the British Empire, when it emerged, was very, very much an incarnation of that. Now, someone sent me a super chat and said, what do you think of the anti-Islam propaganda from left-wing movements? Well, here's the thing. The new atheists, and I have been particularly critical of the new atheists. I do have a bias because I'm not personally an atheist. But, I got on a kick when I was in college, and I listened to Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, and who was the other guy? Sam Harris, and I got on a kick, and they were a thing. And they kind of arose out of nowhere. And it was in the late Bush years, early Obama years. You had this kind of explosion of the new atheists. Yeah, and they were a big thing, and they emerged. And the thing about the new atheists was it seems like, and Bill Maher, he made that movie Religulous, they seem to be very, very reductionist, right? And it's very similar, right? Some of those people that sit there and go, I've read the Quran and have that thing, some of them are Christians, so just Christian fundamentalists, but some of them are actually what you could call new atheists. And the way they see everything, it's all about religion. And if you watch the end of Bill Maher's movie Religulous, right, he's showing all these wars that have all happened because of religion. And it made me physically angry when I watched it. And it was actually, in my college, there was a club called the Atheist Humanist Association. And I sat there and we watched, Bill Maher's Religulous. And at the end, his final conclusion of the movie, he's showing all of these fights around the world and saying it's all because of religion. And he's showing the IRA and the Irish people as if that's all just caused by religion. The Irish would have no problem with the British Empire killing millions of them and all that if it wasn't just the Catholic and Protestant thing. He's showing Palestine, and the Palestinians would just be fine with Israel if it weren't for their religion. And it's this reduction where everything's a matter of religion, right? It's all just a matter of religion, and if everyone was a smart Richard Dawkins, if everyone was a smart atheist like me, there would be no wars. But wars are caused by people being not as smart as I am. It's snide, and it's reductionist. And the reason that it's the new atheism, let me throw that in there. The word atheist goes back to the French Revolution. Right? At the time of the French Revolution, there was a movement against the church, right? France had been a Catholic country. It had basically been a country that was under the dominion of the Catholic Church. It had been an absolute monarchy. And the people of France rose up. You had the French Revolution. During the French Revolution, they actually referred to the churches, like Notre Dame Cathedral and others. They changed them to temples of reason. And they really pushed against religion. Now, when Napoleon came in, he made a deal with the Catholic Church that they would crown him as emperor, and then he famously took the crown at the ceremony, took the crown from the Pope and put it on himself. But they made France a Catholic country under Napoleon. It was like a compromise that Napoleon made. But between the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon, the Reign of Terror, all of that, France was anti-religious. It was under the dominion of the Jacobins, who were very, very anti-religious. They believed in science, and they referred to themselves as atheists, without God, like a theology, theo, that's God. They were atheists. And from that time onward, atheism was always associated with leftism. Someone said someone was an atheist. It was very similar to saying someone was a communist, and that was the main argument among many right-wing people about communism. Communists are godless. They don't believe in God. They're strict materialists, and that was largely true, right? I mean, that the communists saw themselves as in this scientific tradition coming out of the French Revolution that was anti-church and anti-clerical. And that was largely true during the Cold War. So, atheist was associated with communism. Communists associated themselves with atheism. And that was kind of how things were. And, things began to change in the Arab world. You had the rise of Ba'athist Arab socialism, which was secular, but embraced Islam. Hafez Assad, Bashar Assad, they're Muslims. Gaddafi was a Muslim. And then later, in the late 1990s, you had the rise of Bolivarianism. And the Bolivarians are Roman Catholics. Hugo Chavez, Roman Catholic. Evo Morales, Roman Catholic, but he does kind of a pagan thing. He also practices pagan indigenous religion. Very interesting. The Sandinistas of Nicaragua, they arose in the 80s, and they very much were Christian, Roman Catholic, to the point that they had priests in the government. And now, as they are leading Nicaragua, now they were reelected to power in 2006, and now as they continue to lead Nicaragua, the official slogan of their party is Christianity, Socialism, and Solidarity. So post-Cold War, you had the socialist and anti-imperialist and Marxist movement embracing religion. And then you have the new atheists who say, atheism is why the West is so great. And that's why we need to, invade Iraq. And that's why we need to attack Muslim countries, is because they're all a bunch of religious people and they're not as smart. They're all a bunch of religious people and they're not as smart as we are in the West. And so it's this weird flip that we've seen where, now the Chinese Communist Party is very much an atheist. They are hard materialists, communists. They don't believe in God. There are, however, associations in China, pro-communist. There are pro-communist Christian groups, pro-communist Muslim groups, pro-communist Buddhist organizations that are aligned with the communists. But yes, the Chinese Communist Party remains an atheist organization. But even in Russia, Zhuganov, the leader of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, is an Orthodox Christian himself and has adopted Orthodox Christianity, frequently makes statements similar to Hugo Chavez about Jesus being the greatest socialist in all of history. And it seems that there's been a little bit of a flip. But if you listen to the new atheists, the reason, and trust me, I especially at that point in my life when they came around, I was very open to their message because I was just sick of religion. I grew up in this small town, and I could tell you a million stories. I'm not going to do that. But I was just tired of religion. I was angry at religion. And I probably would even have told you at that point in my life I was an atheist. I wasn't really. I still had some faith, but I didn't really recognize it. But regardless, I mean, I was angry at religion, and so when I was open to hearing the new atheists talk, but whenever I would speak, to the new atheists, when I would listen to them, their lectures, their talks, they seemed to just, first of all, not have any political depth, right? They don't know the difference. They don't understand that Saddam Hussein is a secular Arab socialist, that Saudi Arabia, they don't care about that. They don't know. They don't care. As far as they're concerned, all they need to know about Islam is reading the Quran and taking it literally and thinking it's awful. There's this intellectual snobbery that comes out of them, and they seem to fixate on, it's almost like they rank the world's religions in order of bad, and Islam is the top bad, Christianity is the second most bad, Buddhism is they have like a soft spot for Western mysticism or Eastern mysticism, and it's weird, right? It's weird. And whenever China comes up, I gotta love this. You talk to the new atheists. Whenever China comes up, their new atheism all of a sudden just turns right off, right? The Dalai Lama had this brutal feudal kingdom in Tibet. Well, You know, they love the Dalai Lama, right? Evil Chinese communists are killing. It's weird, right? You know, if you want the new atheists to support a primitive, barbaric religious group, just make them a group that fights the Chinese Communist Party. And then they fall. It's weird. Gotta tell you, it's weird. And, you know, and again, they make statements to the effect of the entire Irish national liberation struggle for thousands of years was just a matter of Catholics and Protestants, and if they would all just become atheists, there'd be no war there, there'd be no tension there. They make statements to the effect of, you know, the Israel-Palestine thing is just because the Palestinians are a bunch of Muslims, and that's bad. You know, that's the problem with the new atheist movement, right? Is it lacks any political depth. And it reduces everything to, I'm smarter than you. And that's how they think. I am smarter than you. I am not religious. You are religious. You are dumb because you are religious. I am smart because I am not religious. And if you would be smart like me, everything would be perfect. Right? There's no such thing as capitalism. There's no such thing as imperialism. There's none of that, right? It's all just a matter of people not being as smart as me. And I, Richard Dawkins, am so brilliantly smart. But there you go. Now, Jacob Maxey says socialists should realize it's going to be extremely difficult, and he's absolutely right about that. And, you know, and this belief that religion is the source of all evil in the world, as frustrated as I did get at many points in my life, and I still, I mean, you know, I mean, when you encounter somebody who's a religious fundamentalist, you can get very frustrated. But at the same time, as frustrated as I might get, I mean, the notion that religion is just the source of all evil in the world is absolutely ridiculous, right? In fact, there's been a lot of very good things that have come out of religion. For example, you know, Martin Luther King. You know, for example, you know, I mean, you can go down the line. And that religion is just a social phenomenon. It is just something people do. When people are in groups of society, they develop ideologies and they develop religions for the purpose of organizing and maintaining their society. You have to see religion. You can't see it in terms of good and of black and white. You know what I mean? You have to see it as something that naturally arises in human society, and for good or worse. I mean, and it's a method of holding societies together. And that seems to be a big problem that we have in the West, is that we have deconstructed. Since the 1960s, cultural deconstruction has taken off. It's really taken off. You know, someone's asking, was Jesus sort of a proto-socialist? I would say that, yes. And then in Christ's message, you can find many things that are socialistic. You know, and if you read Karl Kautsky's very good book, The Foundations of Christianity, he talks about how, you know, Christianity, it became an expression of Roman Stoicism. But it was a response to the fact that in Rome you had huge amounts of orphan children on the street, right? In Rome you had proletarians, people who were not slaves, but people who also did not own any property, rented the places in which they lived, craftsmen and others. And if they couldn't get work, they would starve, right? And it was Christianity kind of emerged as a way to, in Rome, I mean, it was, you know, the teachings of Jesus, but it emerged as a sect or a religious viewpoint among Roman proletarians as a way to try and address the problems of Roman society. And they ran orphanages. The early Christian church, one of the main things they did was run orphanages. So all these orphan children that weren't slaves, so they weren't the property of somebody, no one was feeding them, they didn't own any property, they didn't have any parents, they're just running around the streets of Rome. It was a big problem. So the Christian church emerged, the early Christian church ran orphanages for the orphan children. Thank goodness they did that. I mean, is Sam Harris going to tell us that's a bad thing? You know, what did the early Christian church do? It also provided food to people. It emerged, it was a religion, you know, the Christian, the teachings of Jesus Christ that said, you know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Hey, if you were, you know, desperately hungry, wouldn't you want someone to feed you? You know, that kind of the teachings of the early Christian church very much fit in with the needs of Roman society. As Rome had mass unemployment, as Rome had hungry people on its streets, as there were all kinds of people who were proletarians, who could only live so long as they sold their labor, right? The Roman proletariat and the Roman population, it existed to address that. And as much as the Romans tried to resist it, ultimately, as they say, Christianity conquered Rome, right? And one of the great ironies, I should say, one of the greatest ironies of all history is the fact that Emperor Constantine, right? Emperor Constantine, he was the one who converted the Roman Empire to Christianity. He converted the Roman Empire to Christianity because he had a dream. And in the dream, he saw a cross in the sky. and he heard a heavenly voice say, "Under this sign you shall conquer." So he woke up and he said, "Oh my God, we've all got to be Christians now, because under this sign you shall conquer. The way to make a great empire is to have a cross everywhere." And historians, almost every historian, agrees that at the time the Roman Empire transitioned to becoming Christian, it is almost simultaneous with its breakdown. So that divine voice in the dream didn't happen. It was kind of the opposite. "Under this sign you shall crumble," is what the voice really should have said if it was going to predict the future. And that's actually what the book The City of God, one of the main theological texts of Christianity, that's mainly the reason it was written. It was a really big point of defensiveness for the early Christian church, because if Christianity is supposed to be the one true religion, if it's the way to go, why did the Roman Empire adopt it and fall apart, right? You would think, the way people thought back then, right, is you know, if Greece won a war with somebody, that was because Greece's gods were the most powerful, right? If the people of of Britain won a war against the people of Gaul, that was because the gods of the British were more powerful than the gods of Gaul. So the fact that the Roman Empire adopted Christianity as its religion and then crumbled was a really big hard selling point for the early Christian church. Now, I would argue that if you actually dig into the teachings of Jesus Christ, it's not really that big of a deal. It's not really that big of a deal, because if you read the teachings of Jesus Christ, it's not a guide for running an empire. At no point is Jesus Christ giving you advice on how to conquer, right? There's nothing in the teachings of Jesus Christ that I can see that would be advice on how to build a mighty empire and beat down and enslave other people. So, you know, the fact that the Roman Empire, an empire based on plundering people and holding back historical progress and taking loot and humans as slaves as its industrial output decreased, the fact that they crumbled as they adopted the New Testament teachings of Jesus Christ makes perfect sense to me, because it's like, you're not going to learn how to run an empire. You're not going to learn how to run an empire based on Jesus Christ's teachings. It's just not going to happen. Now, what I think is interesting, well, I don't want to get too much into this. I gave a lecture a few months back. I gave a lecture on the fall of Rome. It's called "Is America the New Rome, and Will It Fall?" And you can watch that on YouTube. It's got at least, I think it's up to 3,000 views. One of my more popular lectures. So if you and I know some people that are watching this here were actually in there in person. So if you haven't checked it out, I would recommend checking it out. I had fun doing that lecture. I speak for about an hour. You know, and in the video I made, I included all kinds of graphics, and I did a lot of background research. I quoted a lot of scholars, and so I hope that addresses the Christianity question from Jacob Maxey and from others. Wow, this is an interesting night. This is an interesting night. Well, there you go. Now, I wanted to talk about a couple things here. Now, in the new book, I was getting to this point about Atlanticism, and I want to do, you know, in my lives, I want to do a reading from my new book. So I'm going to do a reading from this section of my book that I wrote about Atlanticism. So hold your horses, and I'm just going to read you the section in my book about Atlanticism as a phenomenon involving the rise of imperialism. So, yes, the new book, hey, it's selling, people are buying it, people are liking it. This is the section from my new book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. This is the section, The Atlanticist Pathology, a Mindset from Hell. The dawn of imperialism, a new stage of the capitalist economy, greatly changed social relations. It resulted in a state of mind unfolding in the Western world that can accurately be described as the Atlanticist pathology. The ruling class of Britain, led by its royal family, boasts about being descended from the Normans, a Germanic tribe of Vandals and Odinists, who seized England at the famous Battle of Hastings in the year of 1066. The Viking raiders of the sea and the Vandal tribes of the forest did not build cities, they raided them. They stole from those who had constructed. They went to what had already been created and looted it, and in some cases they destroyed it. As the British industrialists subordinated themselves to entities like the East India Company and the various finance houses of the London Stock Exchange, this predatory and destructive means of existence came to dominate the international markets. Various geopolitical analysts have referred to Atlanticism as a trend among Western nations throughout history who have prioritized control of trade routes and maritime dominance over economic development on the mainland. The Queen's Empire infamously burned down the various looms of India and Bangladesh, as the colonizer forced a civilization that had been weaving for thousands of years to import its cloth from Britain. China faced 2 opium wars in response to the emperor's efforts to raise living standards and stop the inflow of destruction and plunder. British bankers established the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, HSBC Bank, for the purpose of controlling China's economy and keeping a great civilization poor. Heroin and opium became a central aspect of British imperialism. With the force of the British military, various parts of the world were seized, economically looted, and reduced to mere captive markets for British products. Britain was simply the first in line when it came to imperialism. Germany, France, Belgium, and eventually the United States moved into the globalist model of international capitalism. The Western powers began seizing parts of the developing world and, with economies centralized around banking institutions and monopolies protected by the state, extracted immense profits by crippling the developing world. From 1885 to 1908, Belgium oversaw a genocide of roughly 15 million people in the Congo Free State, an African colony under the personal direction of the king. Most of those who perished were worked to death in the process of extracting natural rubber. The United States seized the Philippines during the Spanish-American War, and then from 1899 to 1913 fought against Filipino resistance. Between 250,000 and 1 million Filipino civilians were killed in the course of the fighting. As Britain rose to be the top superpower of capitalism in its imperialist monopoly stage, the writings of Adam Smith came to be the celebrated worldview on economics. Free trade and free competition in one big global market was to tear down international borders and allow the, quote, superior ones to rise to the top. Language lifted from Charles Darwin's biological texts was used to justify the horrendous atrocities carried out to secure London's position as the top dog. The notion of survival of the fittest was nothing new among thieves and criminals, but Darwin's work allowed the British to proclaim their destruction and impoverishment of the world as simply the natural order of things. The British settlers gunned down entire African villages with primitive machine guns, justifying their crimes with social Darwinist rhetoric about inferior races. Rhodesia emerged as an apartheid plantation state named after the great imperialist Cecil Rhodes in the territory that is now called Zimbabwe. Rhodes described the colonization of the world and the enlistment of British workers to be settlers and overseers across the planet as a matter of ensuring social peace and preventing class struggle and revolution. In 1895, Rhodes wrote, quote, "I was in the East End of London, a working-class quarter, yesterday, and I attended a meeting of the unemployed." This is Cecil Rhodes. This is a quote, folks. "I listened to the wild speeches, which were just a cry for bread, bread, and on my way home I pondered over the scene and became even more convinced of the importance of imperialism. My cherished idea is a solution for the social problem, i.e., in order to save the 40 million inhabitants of the United Kingdom from a bloody civil war, we colonial statesmen must acquire new lands to settle the surplus population, to provide new markets for the goods produced in the factories and mines. The empire, as I have always said, is a bread and butter question. If you want to avoid civil war, you must become imperialists." The rise of the Atlanticist pathology involved the promoting of a generalized Vandal mindset among the population. The British homeland, much like Rome, developed a domestic culture designed to breed sadistic raiders and vandals. In Victorian Britain, parents were encouraged never to hug their children and to greatly restrict their affection. Sadistic corporal punishment became a standard for school children, with rattan canes imported from Asia as treasured implements for inflicting pain. A puritanical and shame-based attitude toward matters of sexuality became widespread. War was glorified in every aspect of life. As British imperialism rode high across the planet, plundering and destroying what is now labeled the Global South, at home, Britain was cultivating a culture of insanity. It was the British Empire that introduced humanity to what is now described as the serial killer, a pattern of criminal behavior in which a man murders women in a sexualized way. London's infamous Jack the Ripper grabbed headlines in 1888 with his infamous killing and mutilation of prostitutes in London's Whitechapel, the very working-class quarter where Cecil Rhodes had his revelation about the importance of imperialism less than a decade later. As the gruesome details of the murders were reported in the press, the London Times received thousands of letters from individuals hoping to take credit for the unsolved crimes. Most of the letters were anonymous, but they revealed that beneath the surface, many British people, raised in an atmosphere glorifying war, plunder, and punishment amid sexual repression, secretly cherished fantasies about engaging in similar behavior. With so many imposters stealing his spotlight, and this is classic, the actual Whitechapel murderer sent body parts from the victim in a package to prove that he was the real Jack the Ripper. The letter, containing half of a human kidney, was signed "From Hell." Soon, this pattern of serial killers who sexualized their murders became a widespread phenomenon across the Western world, declining only in the past few decades. An article from the Guardian newspaper published in 2018 quotes criminologists noticing this pattern of homicidal behavior has seen a, quote, clear downward trend from the 1989 peak. Whatever progressivism had been at the foundations of the revolutions to topple feudalism seemed to be pushed into the background with the rise of imperialism, capitalism in its monopoly stage. The new global economic order became an expression of the Atlanticist pathology. The Vandals had seized control of the high seas, and as pirates, they proceeded to raid and plunder the entire world. The city builders were in retreat. And that is a section from my new book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. That is the section on the Atlanticist pathology. And I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I was glancing up, trying to catch the comments as I was reading from it. I know someone sent me a super chat. I believe it was Ruben Garcia. I think you were asking about ISIS and al-Sisi in Egypt, and that's just a whole mess. It really is. There seem to be different factions, and the military, that was al-Sisi, and the military overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood. And, to be fair, Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood was talking about sending troops, Egyptian troops to Syria to fight against Assad. That was a mess. The whole thing is a mess. Now, the Egyptian military, a lot of blood on their hands. This is a military cultivated by the United States. Since the decline of Arab socialism, the Egyptian military has basically been an outpost of U.S. influence. But there are two big factions in Egyptian society. You had the Muslim Brotherhood, which won elections because of its charity work and because of its caring for people. You have the Egyptian military, which is a huge section of the Egyptian economy. They own factories and stuff, and the two fought it out. There was the Egyptian Revolution. Immediately after the Egyptian Revolution, you had the election of Morsi, who was a Muslim Brotherhood guy who was elected. Very anti-Assad, wanted to even send troops to Syria, but he seemed to carry with him kind of the we represent democracy, we're against dictatorship. He carried with him the halo, the laurels of the Egyptian Revolution of 2011, of the Arab Spring. He was then toppled by the military. And one thing I will say, and a lot of people didn't notice this, is when the killing was going on, when the Egyptian military toppled Morsi, all the communists of the Arab world supported it. They did. All the communists of the Arab world supported it, right? the Muslim Brotherhood has killed so many communists, has assassinated so many people, has such a bloody legacy. If you're a Marxist or a socialist in Egypt or in the Arab world, if you're a Ba'athist, if you're a secular anti-imperialist, you hate the Muslim Brotherhood. So it was weird because the United States seemed to be supporting it. There were even some leftist groups that protested it. And that was their position, but all the leftists in Egypt seemed to go, okay, they're killing Muslim Brotherhood people, that's fine. I mean, there was the, the Muslim Brotherhood represents reaction in the Arab and Muslim world, and there was a feeling, even among a lot of Marxists, that, hey, anything to stop the Muslim Brotherhood. And that was the feeling. And the U.S., you'll notice the U.S. media was a little bit confused, because some sections of the U.S. media sympathized with the Brotherhood, and some sections of the U.S. media seemed to, support the military. And officially, I guess the USA seemed to be supporting the military, but there was an odd, sympathy. It was a little bit confusing. And at the end of the day, the Egyptian military, backed by the United States, the Muslim Brotherhood, long history with the CIA, backed by the United States, it was just two factions fighting it out, basically. That was what was happening. The Egyptian military seems to be closer to Saudi Arabia. The Muslim Brotherhood seems to be closer to Qatar and Turkey. And, it was two factions fighting it out. And that's, the Arab Spring was a disaster. It really was. I've talked a lot, I've written a lot about Obama as Napoleon, right? A lot of people don't know this, but Napoleon, when he was a general in the French military, he tried to take over Egypt and Syria, which were under the dominion of the British at that time, right? He tried to take over Egypt and Syria. And in order to do it, he sent out a proclamation. It was put on posters and displayed all over Egypt, all over Syria, proclaiming that he was a Muslim. Napoleon said he was a Muslim. And he put up posters everywhere, people of the Arab world, I am a follower of the Prophet and the Quran, and I come to restore your rights against the British. And he wasn't a Muslim, but he was hoping to get Arab people to back him in his effort against the British. And the British were hated in the Arab world for their atrocities. And, and he joked about it. I mean, it was a joke, right? He made a joke. He said, hey, what's an empire for putting on a few sandals and wearing a turban? Ha ha. It was a joke. Among the French military officers, he joked about pretending to be a Muslim for political purposes. I believe that Obama's presidency was a 21st century version of that. Obama was not a Muslim. He was not a Muslim, okay? His father was a Muslim. He went to a Muslim boarding school in Indonesia. Indonesia is a Muslim country, so if you're going to go to an elite school in Indonesia, it's going to be a Muslim school. Obama met with Edward Said. Obama was not a Muslim. Obama was definitely not a Muslim, right? But the fact that his middle name is Hussein, the fact that he had a Muslim dad, the fact that he lived in a Muslim country, it was a way to send a message to the Arab world, hey, this guy, he gets you. He's with you. And he wasn't. He wasn't with you. But think about what would have happened if the Arab Spring, if that explosion of rebellions had happened when George W. Bush was the president. Think about it. Think about what would happen today if the Arab Spring, something like the Arab Spring, broke out now and Trump was the president. Right? The Arab Spring, for the most part, worked out in the favor of the United States. It resulted in the overthrow of the Libyan socialist government. It resulted in reducing Syria, a long-standing anti-imperialist Ba'ath socialist government, to civil war. Egypt, it didn't really change that much. Got the Brotherhood in there, now the military's back. At the end of the day, right, the Muslim world during that Arab Spring, there was a guy in the White House who the Muslim world was convinced somehow sympathized with them, somehow understood them more, and he didn't, right? He didn't. But it was part of faking out, and the fact that they had this, it was like a made-for-TV. It was almost like Rosie O'Donnell's and Donald Trump's, fight on Twitter. It was the same thing, except it was, between Netanyahu and Obama. Netanyahu and Obama, the USA continued giving aid to Israel. I mean, the USA, the USA wasn't doing anti-Israeli things, but the fact that Netanyahu and Obama didn't like each other, that was great for Netanyahu. He looked like to the Israelis, yeah, you're sticking it to that Muslim guy in the White House, and to Obama it looked great, I'm standing up to Israel, and to the Arab world, oh, look, he's standing, it was a psyop. It really was. I mean, it was an effort to try and convince the Arab world that the United States was somehow on their side. And it wasn't. And, now the Yemen situation, the Arab Spring ultimately resulted in, took a long time, but it played a key role in the uprising that's taking place in Yemen now. In Bahrain, it was an anti-imperialist uprising, and Saudi Arabia invaded and restored the monarchy and killed people in the streets and murdered them. But all over the Arab world, the Arab Spring, this explosion, which people say was spontaneous, and there were aspects of it that was spontaneous, but social media played a really big role in manipulating it. And, you can read about the role that Alphabet Google played, and there was an employee, I believe, like Jared Cohen, who was on the board of Alphabet Google, who was also a State Department employee working for Hillary Clinton's State Department, and Samantha Power, and social media was manipulating that thing like you wouldn't believe. And between Obama and the White House, this guy who might be a Muslim, wasn't, and social media manipulating things, they were able to turn the spontaneity or the anger, the outpouring of the Arab Spring, they were able to manipulate it to bring down, the socialist government of Libya, to reduce Syria to civil war, and damage control, ultimately. Bahrain, they kept it locked down. There was going to be a CNN documentary about the uprising in Bahrain, and it got canceled. Yeah. Now Yemen, they still don't have control over. But ultimately, you can imagine that if there was somebody else in the White House, if there was a guy that the Arab world kind of universally hated in the White House, that maybe like the Islamic Republic of Iran or Hezbollah might become the winners out of a situation like the Arab Spring. Instead, ultimately, the big winners out of the Arab Spring were the Muslim Brotherhood, were the Saudis. They ultimately became the victors, and they were able to manipulate the spontaneity. And I think that, again, that historical parallel between Obama and Napoleon needs to be brought up. But what else is on people's minds? See, we've been going for over an hour now. Good times. Fun times. What else is on people's minds here? I'm having a great time. If you're just joining us now is the time to tweet this out. Make it a bigger conversation. Put this on social media. Tweet out, hey, Caleb's talking. Join me. Make it a Facebook status. Now is also the time to push the subscribe button if you haven't done that. Now is also the time to push that bell next to the subscribe button. Right? Now, someone's asking me about my favorite novel. Now, interestingly, I'm not... That's Ramiro, by the way. Shout out to Ramiro. Glad you're joining us. It's not my favorite novel, but it's a novel I enjoyed, and I wanted to talk about it because, okay, we all went to high school, and a lot of us in high school had to read a novel called The Grapes of Wrath. And if you're like me, whenever you're in school and you're required to read a book, you don't really read it. You kind of have to have your heart in it to read a book. So I kind of half-read Grapes of Wrath in high school when it was required reading. But after the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, I read The Grapes of Wrath. And The Grapes of Wrath is a great book. It really is a great, great book. It's a great book. It really is. And the reason that I liked The Grapes of Wrath is it's the story of a family, the Jode family. And they're Okies. They're in Oklahoma. Their home gets foreclosed by a bank, so they have to flee. It's John Steinbeck. But every other chapter in The Grapes of Wrath is a kind of an essay or a political allegory. So you hear the family, the Jode family, what they're going through. Next chapter is, some kind of political essay. And the political essays in particular are very, very, very Marxist. John Steinbeck was not a member of the Communist Party. But his wife was. He distributed the Daily Worker in California, and it won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Very Marxist, right? There's all these beautiful little allegories. Like there's the very famous "Who Do We Shoot" story, right? Where a guy's they're gonna bulldoze his home because the bank is foreclosing. So he's out there. He's got his gun and he wants to shoot the guy on the tractor. And the guy says, well, if you shoot me, they're just going to send another guy. And he says, well, I'll shoot the guy who sent you. And, well, who sent you? It was a bank. Well, I'll shoot the bank. Well, you can't really shoot a bank. And the whole thing, the point being, the problem is capitalism that is taking people's homes away. It's not some individual. The problem is the system. It's not going to solve it by shooting an individual. Very great analogy. There's a section, and towards the end, you've got the labor union rights, and they're talking about the Reds. The Reds are anybody that doesn't want people to just make 2 cents an hour, and it's just and the labor agitators, and and there's a section where he compares Karl Marx to Lenin, or he compares Karl Marx to Thomas Jefferson and to Abraham Lincoln. It's a very Marxist novel. And it's very powerful stuff, and it's socialist realism, or social realism, I guess. I really enjoyed The Grapes of Wrath, and the movies of it the movies just show the Joad family. You're not getting the political allegories. It's a work of political rhetoric more than anything, if you read The Grapes of Wrath. It's political allegories, political analogies. I am going to take this camera and move it down a notch. There we go. How's that, folks? But yeah, I really enjoyed The Grapes of Wrath. So if you're somebody who likes, Marxist political kind of stuff, read The Grapes of Wrath. I really recommend it. I really do. I enjoyed The Grapes of Wrath. Another book you might like, if you're into that kind of thing, is The Mother by Maxim Gorky. That novel is considered to be the first work of socialist realism. And it's, Maxim Gorky, the Russian Marxist novelist. And he tells the story of somebody in a small town, a young student in a small town who becomes a communist revolutionary. And it's a very good book. And it gives you kind of an understanding of, it gives you kind of a portrait of Russian society and Russian factory workers, what their lives were like, and the way that the Russian revolutionary intelligentsia operated. It gives you kind of a thing of that. Now, Lincolnite Yankee is saying that Grapes of Wrath is like Les Miserables. It's not. I don't think it is. Les Miserables, everyone knows Les Miserables from the Broadway musical, made into a movie, twice, right? They made like a non-musical movie of it with Liam Neeson, and then they made a musical movie of it. And, the Broadway musical of Les Miserables came out in the 60s. Right? And the big climax is the people on the barricades waving the red flag, and that's the 60s. That's the 60s. That's the 1960s. But Les Miserables, if you actually read Victor Hugo, it's not saying that. That's a projection. That is a projection of the spirit of the 1960s, of young student radicals protesting. That's, 1968 France, and, Berkeley, and Haight-Ashbury, and, SDS, and Bring the War. It's a projection of all that stuff. It's a projection of all that stuff onto a novel, that's really not saying that. It's from the 1800s, and Victor Hugo, he's giving a portrait of French society, and Victor Hugo, it's kind of like The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It's kind of like a lot of Victor Hugo stuff, where the message is kind of, society is full of all these evil things, and in religion we can find consolation. And the student uprising is kind of portrayed as foolish, almost. The novel is kind of like, here's French society, you have prostitution, you have factory workers being worked to death, you have, Jean Valjean is a good guy because he's guided by his Christian faith, and that he's moral, and look, his soul was won for God by the guy who did the silver for him. And it really doesn't have kind of that pseudo-revolutionary or 1960s left vibe that you get from the musical. It really doesn't have that, It is wrangling with big moral questions. You do have, the inspector, who believes in the law. And of course, and it gets into the fact that, right, the inspector, what's his name? Javert, he believes in the law, and he's trying to enforce the law, but he's trying to go after a good man. And it gets into some moral questioning, some bigger moral questioning about structures of society and such. But overall, the thrust of Victor Hugo, he's getting at kind of like society is evil. It's actually more like Charles Dickens. It's really Charles Dickens-y kind of stuff, right? That we live in this new world, right? The new world created by capitalism after the overthrow of feudalism seems to be without morality, right? That seems to be the message, right? And you get that in Wagner operas, for example. My wife and I, we went to go see Götterdämmerung And the last line of the last opera of the Ring cycle of Wagner is the ring is being taken by the Rhine maidens, and the character who has killed the hero and all that shouts, "Give me my gold," and it's all the message of the Wagner operas too. It's kind of like, okay, so feudalism has been overthrown. The feudal order is overthrown. We no longer have peasants. We no longer have natural superiors. People are no longer born into their place. We now have business owners trying to make profits. We now have elected governments and nation states. And it's all of them trying to, wow, we have this thing called greed, and we have this thing called profit motives, right? And they're all kind of wrangling with it. And Charles Dickens is wrangling with it. Christmas Carol, he's trying to figure out what's going on. Something's wrong. Look at the society. We got homeless kids like Oliver Twist. And we got, and he's got that going on. We got Victor Hugo, and they're not really socialists though. There might be kind of a vague religious utopian edge to it, but they don't really come to a conclusion. It's kind of the conclusion is we need the Bible and people to be nice to each other. They don't call for some kind of uprising or revolt, and they're kind of skeptical or suspicious, and you can almost see kind of a conservative admiration for feudalism in it, right? It's, if we could get back to everyone knowing their place and order, things would be better. It's got a conservatism in it, right? You wouldn't associate it with conservatism now because conservatives at this point seem to be just obsessed with defending capitalism. But at that time, it's almost what people might refer to as right-wing anti-capitalism, which I think now is a very big trend. Mind you, but it was very big back then, and in the West, it's certainly not a big trend. People don't even know it exists. People think right wing and capitalism are synonymous. But around the world, there has been a long-standing right wing critique of capitalism. You can go back to it's been around a long time, and that doesn't get acknowledged. I think you have to go beyond Western politics at this time. That's the whole thing. You listen to Dinesh D'Souza. Well, the Nazis couldn't have been right-wing because they said capitalism was bad. It's like right-wing anti-capitalism doesn't exist, You could call it right-wing anti-capitalism or clerical anti-capitalism. Predates capitalism. The Catholic Church was always very critical of money and money lending, and, they talked about filthy lucre, right? That's what they used to call money, and, touching money made you, tainted just touching it. Right-wing anti-capitalism is a trend that's been around. We just don't, in the United States, it's not a thing, at this time. And anyone who says anything critical of capitalism at any point in history is immediately declared to be a communist or a Marxist. And that shows how shallow our discourse has become, right? And that's the way things are. Swine class is mentioning Ezra Pound. Sure, Ezra Pound was very critical of capitalism. Julius Evola, and that right-wing anti-capitalism is a big trend. But what else is new? What else is new, folks? What else is on your mind? I've got other things we can talk about. Okay. At risk of becoming easily mocked, has anyone looked into this? I've heard people talk about this. Right? This is a thing, right? We all saw Deep Impact, right? We all saw Armageddon. But the idea that an asteroid could potentially hit the Earth and that we could be depending on the scientific community to attack it with a nuclear weapon or to attack it with a different device, do something to knock it off its course to save the human race, apparently such a thing, is not as far-fetched as you might think, actually. And this is a Wall Street Journal article. This isn't from, the National Enquirer. It's rather interesting, but, they've been having scientific conferences to talk about what would we do in the event of an asteroid coming towards the Earth, right? NASA's planetary defense budget has been steadily increasing over the past decade to $150 million allocated in 2019 for asteroid detection, asteroid tracking, and related programs that amount to less than 1% of the space agency's total budget of $21.5 billion. Hey, it's there. Some people are worried about asteroids, right? And there's the whole thing. I mean, this shouldn't not be on our radar screen. I think it's an important thing. I think it's something we should pay attention to. Trust me, we would all be disturbed if there was an asteroid that hit the Earth and killed us all, right? I mean, it's worth paying attention to. Now, as apparently, according to the article, the chances of it happening anytime soon are quite slim. But hey, I think it's good people are paying attention to it. And I think ultimately, issues like this, they're very, very important. And it's kind of like, but they all kind of point toward why we need to get over capitalism, right? I mean, global warming, for goodness sakes, right? I mean, it's so many things that point to we need a more highly organized society. We need a society that's much more highly organized, where we strategically, as a group of human beings, start moving to try and resolve our problems. And it seems like, you know, we don't. I mean, we continue to focus on, marketing and, it's a problem. It really, really is. I mean, you think about the inefficiency of capitalism. How much junk mail do you get every day? Right? I open my mailbox. I've got an ad wanting me to buy. Think about that. In a rationally planned economy, you'd have none of that. And all the people who put all their energy into making that junk mail would be doing something productive. And all the people who, who have the job of printing that junk mail would be doing something productive. All the people who design and deliver that would be designing and delivering things that were actually to the benefit of civilization. There's a lot of things, they talk about socially necessary labor and socially unnecessary labor. There's a lot of things in capitalism that don't really serve any social purpose. Insurance. Would there be insurance under socialism? Probably not, right? I sold insurance at one point in my life. I didn't sell insurance, but I did marketing with an insurance firm. And it's like there's so many things in capitalism that, so much of the U.S. law, right? People think that laws are about not stealing and not beating people up on the street, but a huge amount of U.S. law is about simply settling monetary disputes, copyrights. You go down the line. There's so much stuff. So, people say, well, you can't do socialism. Who's going to pay for it? You got to waste all the money. Do you know how much waste is involved in trying to manage a system like capitalism, right? There's a huge, huge, huge amount of wasteful, socially unnecessary activity that goes on, right? Think about it, right? If we had a rationally organized economy, we would use resources in a much more rational way. The society we live in is highly, highly, highly inefficient. What else is on people's minds? One thing that struck me. So Facebook has decided to ban any ads that encourage people not to vote. Did you see that? That's one of the new Facebook rules. In the lead up to the 2020 elections, you cannot put an ad on Facebook, encouraging people not to vote. If you put an ad on Facebook and say, don't vote, not worth your time, it won't be put up there. And they will post anything. They are going to